Hi, I'm Alan Watt, and this is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Today it is Friday, the 30th of March, 2007. It's been, and I'm sure it's for everyone these days, a hectic week. I get so many phone calls, so many emails, and I can't, to be honest with you, even keep up with the emails. It's impossible. And I try to red flag all the ones I want to reply to, and I can't even keep up with them. There are so many topics concerning the scientific system we're living under today, with the spraying in the skies, the modified food, the killing off of the bees, which isn't surprising because they've been dying for years actually, because of the modified food and the spraying, and all the mites that are brought in a form of warfare. Because we don't need the crops anymore in North America, because under the NAFTA and the free trade agreement, the precursor to NAFTA, it was pretty well decided that places like Chile would be the breadbasket. And that's where the money has been going to build up the big agri-food businesses. On top of that, we have the weather warfare ongoing worldwide. And for the last week or so, 10 days, they've had tremendously heavy spraying in Texas, which is a sign of storms being built up. I've watched it happen here last year. And you can actually tell by the kind of shades of the spray, especially the darker ones, that they're building up a storm. And sure enough, in comes the high winds and tornadoes, and Texas is going through that right now. The major media naturally won't talk about it because we're supposed to believe we are causing it, and all panic and think, my goodness, it's global warming, we got to stop using gasoline and move into these compact cities and be ruled by experts who will save us all. That's the shepherding techniques that are being used. So many topics, but I will be going into some of them, but not hanging on them, because there's enough talk show hosts out there covering all this stuff. I will be going into the bees though, because that's very important, and I have a lot of information on that. I've been watching that for the last 10 years almost. Tonight and today, I was talking to so many people from different countries in different states of acceptance, knowledge, waking up, various degrees of calmness to panic. The ones who tend to panic are overwhelmed by what they see as this tremendous, powerful organization that rules their lives. I generally tell them that this has happened before in history. There's nothing new in it except the sciences that are being utilized and the massive tax base they have to create weaponry and to create all the spraying material. That's a lot of material to spray over the skies worldwide. And the HARP technology, which is in lots of different countries working in unison. It's not just in Alaska. This is war on the public to make us all terrified, believe it's our own fault, and be allowed to be guided into the new sheep pens called habitat areas, where it would be handled more efficiently for those at the top, the psychopaths, the big clubs of psychopaths that rule the world and have done for quite some time. The staggering part when people wake up is to realize that all those people and all the propaganda they've been told to respect are shysters. That's the staggering part, because the propaganda has been incredible from childhood onwards. And if your parents didn't know, then you won't generally know. propaganda is nothing new. In the old days, historians were employed and paid for by kings and their courts to write glowing reports on the histories of the said kings. You'll find this even in Egypt. When Egyptians would lose a battle, you could find initial records of them losing, but later records of them, just like Orwell's 1984, were rewritten to say that he'd won, or that he was generous to his enemies and didn't kill them all and decided to go home. Lots of different stories they would put in there to always make the king appear to be a very generous, a superhuman type being. The techniques of control over the minds have been studied by psychopaths for thousands of years. Today they call them institutes and institutions that study the populations. They keep their pulse on the public. And in all ages, all types of governments, which are always run by the same types, you see, psychopaths that want power, they employ thousands of spies to keep the pulse of the people, so they know what's going on. They know the mood of the people. They know how far to push them, how far to tax them, how far to stress them. If the people get edgy or antsy, you create a war to take their minds off things, so that they stop complaining about government and demand that the government save them. These are all very well understood, very old techniques of control. For those that would like to look into some of these techniques, you could do no better than to look into a readily available book. And there's different editions on Machiavelli. Machiavelli was an advisor to royalty in his own day. And just like Bacon, they would write these little really resumes to kings and queens of different countries sometimes to show their insight into managing the populace and what then they would actually say, because they understood, psychopaths understand normal people very well. They don't understand why they're like that, in other words, what they feel, but they understand how normal people react to all different kinds of situations. Therefore, they know what the people want to hear as well. They can head off overthrows of governments and so on by keeping the people's pulse and feeling it, and heading the people off at the pass, diverting them through crisis management and such. This is all old stuff which we're seeing rehashed today on a grander scale with an international group of all the top families that have risen up through the psychopathic ranks of the elite. And with all their different educational institutes and degrees and so on, the top psychopaths are all at the top, managing us like a herd of cattle. And we shouldn't be surprised at the ongoing propaganda, and those who have gone into the studies of the past will recognize it's the same techniques being replayed over again. So that's my little babble there for an introduction. It's been a long week. This is an introduction to Machiavelli. This particular book was by Max, he gave an introduction, was Max Lerner, The Prince and the Discourses. They call them Discourses. And this was the Modern Library College edition. I have older ones, but this is readily available. And it says here in the introduction, the structure of the book is division into chapters, and even some of the chapter headings follow the conventional form of what has been called the Mirror of Princes literature. The discussion of how to rule conquered territory, what advisers a prince should rely on, how he should conduct himself among the intrigues of diplomacy, whether he should depend mainly on fortified castles or entrenched camps in warfare. But the intellectual spirit that pervades the book is quite another matter. Here we are in the presence of something little short of a revolution in political thinking. The humanists who had written books about princes had written in the idealistic and scholastic medieval tradition. They were written by theology and metaphysics. Machiavelli rejected metaphysics, theology, idealism. The whole drift of his work is towards a political realism, unknown to the formal writing of his time. Now, it's interesting, even this author says the formal writing of his time. He's telling you that it was understood, because there's a formal history given to the public and the informal given to those who take over as advisors and rulership and so on, the exoteric and the esoteric. He goes on to say here, I say unknown to the formal writing. That does not mean it was unknown to his time. See, there's an admission of that right there. Machiavelli was expressing the realism that characterized the actual politics and the popular ethos of his time, and really it's for all times. I'll go into just one chapter here. It's a book well worth reading if you want to see how well psychopaths study and understand the public. This chapter is chapter 16. A people that has been accustomed to live under a prince preserves its liberties with difficulty if by accident it has become free. If by accident it's become free. You see, it's not, when you become free you think you're doing it, it's only a bloom, once in a blue moon, it's actually an accident, and you come free for a little while. Because most revolutions are led by the same boys who realize they must go into hiding again but still rule from behind the scenes. He goes on to say, many examples in ancient history prove how difficult it is for a people that has been accustomed to live under the government of a prince to preserve its liberty, if by some accident it has recovered it, as was the case with Rome after the expulsion of the Tarquins. And this difficulty is a reasonable one, for such a people may well be compared to some wild animal, which, although by nature ferocious and savage, has been, as it were, subdued by having been always kept imprisoned and in servitude, and being let out into the open fields, not knowing how to provide food and shelter for itself, becomes an easy prey to the first one who attempts to chain it up again. Now, I'll read that little part again, the last part, because we read things, you see, we're taught not to understand what we read. It's a system we're taught, learn ABC and repeat after me, but don't think about it. So he's talking about the people who might have become free through an accident. He says, but they become subdued again, easily, by those that become easy prey to the first one who attempts to chain them up again. So the psychopaths, you see, there's always different psychopaths up and coming. They live amongst us. There's a deviancy around us, within us. And the psychopaths are almost a separate species. No, they're not reptilian. They simply happen to be born into families at the top who are inbred to be psychopaths. But we also have this fluke at the bottom as well, where occasional person is just simply born that way. It says the same thing happens to a people that has not been accustomed to self-government. For, ignorant of all public affairs, of all means of defence or offence, neither knowing the princes nor being known by them, it soon relapses under a yoke, oftentimes much heavier than the one which it had just but shaken off. So you can actually think you're fighting for freedom only to go under tyranny, and a worse tyranny than you had before, because of the leaders that are supplied. This difficulty occurs even when the body of the people is not wholly corrupt. But when corruption has taken possession of the whole people, then it cannot preserve its free condition, even for the shortest possible time, as we shall see further on. Well, he knows, you see, eventually it becomes so corrupt in different periods in history from the top that everyone below them emulates the ones at the top, and that's taken as the normal, until you have a completely unworkable, inhumane society of predators feeding upon predators until nothing works anymore. Now, this has happened all down through history because the psychopaths always step in very quickly when the people have just thought they've won some kind of freedom, and they work and form their clubs and their little Masonic groups, etc., and start taking it all over again. And therefore our argument is a reference to a people where corruption has not yet become general and where the good still prevail over the bad. To the above comes another difficulty, which is that the state that becomes free makes enemies for itself and not friends. All those become its enemies who were benefited by the tyrannical abuses and fattened upon the treasures of the prince. He's talking about the previous one. And who, now being deprived of these advantages, cannot remain content, and are therefore driven to attempt to re-establish the tyranny so as to recover their former authority and advantages. That right there, he's saying, you see, that when you have other corrupt nations too who are all feeding off the general public of each other, because they all have alliances, and for some strange reason the people just manage by accident to overthrow the tyranny. For a little while, those other countries which are corrupt, and like the old tyrannical prince or government, they'll come after you and try to get you back in again under their thumb, because slavery is what it's all really about. The predators must live off the slaves, even if the slaves think they're free. This reminds me of the United Nations, the big club of where all the world tyrants are, or they put their front men in to speak for them, under always good terminology of helping the people and the saviour of the world. And when a country does manage to take its own route out of them and go somewhere else, they call it a rogue nation. They want them back in the fold, get the rogue back, or kill him. It's the same old stuff all over again. A state, then, as I have said, that becomes free, makes no friends, for free governments bestow honours and rewards only according to certain honest and fixed rules, outside of which there are neither the one nor the other. And such as obtain these honours and rewards do not consider themselves under obligations to anyone, because they believe that they were entitled to them by their merits. Besides the advantages that result to the mass of the people from a free government, such as to be able freely to enjoy one's own without apprehension, to have nothing to fear for the honour of his wife and daughters, or for himself, or they used to have marriages in those days. All these, I say, are not appreciated by anyone while he is in the enjoyment of them. For no one will confess himself under obligation to anyone merely because he has not been injured by him. Thus it is that a state that has freshly achieved liberty makes enemies and no friends. And to prevent this inconvenience and the disorders which are apt to come with it, there is no remedy more powerful, valid, healthful, and necessary than the killing of the sons of Brutus, who, as history shows, had conspired with other Roman youths for no other reason than because under the consuls they could not have the same extraordinary advantages they had enjoyed under the kings, so that the liberty of the people seemed to have become their bondage. In other words, the psychopathic inbreds at the top get fed up when they lose any power at all, and their lavish lifestyle and their arrogant lifestyle and tyranny over the people, they resent it naturally when they're removed, so they conspire to get back as fast as they can. Whoever undertakes to govern a people under the form of either republic or monarchy, without making sure of those who are opposed to this new order of things, establishes a government of very brief duration. It is true that I regard as unfortunate those princes who, to assure their government to which the mass of the people is hostile, are obliged to resort to extraordinary measures, For he who has but a few enemies can easily make sure of them without great scandal, meaning get rid of them. But he who has the masses hostile to him can never make sure of them. And the more cruelty he employs, because they always know this, to go through the steps of tyranny and yelling at you and imprisoning different people to terrify the public. So they use cruelty. That's standard. And the more cruelty he employs, the feebler will be his authority become. So that his best remedy is to try and secure the goodwill of the people. So here's the con, you see. Try and secure the goodwill of the people. The same tyrant, you see. Although I have departed in this discourse from my subject, in speaking sometimes of a republic and sometimes of a prince, yet I will say a few words more, so as not to be obliged to come back to this matter. A prince, then, who wishes the goodwill of a people that is hostile to him, I speak of such princes as have been tyrants in their country, should first of all ascertain what the people really desire. And he will always find that they want two things. Now this is stuff written in the Middle Ages, and yet it was knowledge from sciences which were thousands of years old. It's always been passed down. What do people want? It says, 1, to revenge themselves on those who have been the cause of their enslavement. That's always the case. And that's, again, another trait they can use, because they can blame someone else and you'll attack them. And the other, to recover their liberty. The first of these desires the prince may satisfy entirely, and the second in part. Now this is important, he says, and the second in part. Because obviously if you want to stay in charge and rule over people, you can't give them liberty. So you give them the appearance of liberty. As to the first, the following is an example in point. When Clearchus, tyrant of Heraclea, had been banished, a dissension arose between the people and the nobles of Heraclea. The latter, finding themselves the feebler of the two, resolved to recall Clearchus. And having conspired together, they placed him in opposition to the popular faction of the people of Heraclea, and thus deprived the people of their liberty. Clearchus, finding himself placed between the insolence of the nobles on the one hand, whom he could in no way content or control, and the rage of the popular faction on the other hand, who could not support the loss of their liberty, resolved suddenly to rid himself of the importunities of the nobles, and to secure to himself the goodwill and support of the people. Availing of a favourable opportunity, he had all the nobles massacred, to the extreme satisfaction of the people. You see, that's what you'll find again in history. Psychopaths can be tremendous allies. I hesitate to call themselves friends, but they're allies with common causes when they're all benefiting. And yet they're all well aware that each one's a fox. And they're all well aware too that they better play very, very quick games if they're going to survive when times get bad, because the ones who are slightly higher than them will have no problem at throwing them to the people as a cause of all their problems. So, availing of a favourable opportunity, had all the nobles massacred to the extreme satisfaction of the people, and in this way he satisfied one of the wishes of the people, namely the desire of revenge. But as to the other popular desire, that of recovering their liberty, the prince, not being able to satisfy that, you see, they will never give you liberty. How can you have a prince living a lifestyle like that and give the people freedom at the same time? You see, the system itself, based on money, status, class, which comes from it all, is Babylon. That is the tower. You can't fix Babylon and have it all at the same time. You can't keep parts of it, knock down parts of the tower when the base itself is faulty and corrupt. The foundation is corrupt. That's why we keep repeating the same system over again over time. The crooks must always rise to the top in the system. It's called success. So, not being able to satisfy that, you should examine the causes that make them desire to be free. So here you are. You couldn't give them liberty, but as to the other popular desire, that of recovering their liberty, the prince, not being able to satisfy that, should examine the causes that make them desire to be free. Make them desire to be free. So this is a real psychopath here, showing all sides of things. They understand this perfectly. What makes the people desire to be free? And you will find that a small part of them wish to be free for the purpose of commanding, whilst all the others, who constitute an immense majority, that's the people, desire liberty, so as to be able to live in greater security. You think the people are not understood? This is old stuff. This is old stuff that's never really old, because it's always used in all ages. So immediately the psychopath looks at the people, once he's massacred off all these other crooks and survived and is still in charge. But he immediately looks for those new psychopaths that haven't had power before but lust after it, and he recruits them from people below to fill the gaps, you see. For in all republics, however organized, there are never more than 40 or 50 citizens who attain a position that entitles them to command. As this is a small number, it is easy to make sure of them, either by having them put out of the way, meaning bump them off, or by giving them such a share of the public honours and offices as, according to their condition, will in great measure content them. The payoff, the access to the public purse, because that's the only wealth there is what's given by the public. They want into the honey pot. Now, here's how he talks about the rest. He separated the psychopaths without saying so. Those who wanted command, who crave command, that's who he meant. And here's what he talks about the rest. The others, who only care to live in security, are easily satisfied by institutions and laws that confirm at the same time the general security of the people and the power of the prince. When a prince does this, and the people see that by no chance he infringes the laws, he should really put, or appears to, they will in a very little while be content. He's talking about the masses of sheep, you see, and live in tranquility. That's his words. An example of this is the kingdom of France, where there would be no security but for the fact that the king there has bound himself by a number of laws that provide for the security of all his people. Those who organized that state wanted that the kings should dispose of the army and treasury at their own will, but in all other matters they should conform to the laws. The sovereign, therefore, or that republic, which fails from the start to secure its authority, should do so on the first occasion, as the Romans did, and he who allows the opportunity to pass will repent too late, not having done what he should have done in the beginning. The Romans, being not yet corrupted when they recovered their liberty, were able to maintain it after the death of the sons of Brutus and expulsion of the Tarquins, by means of such laws and institutions as we have treated of above. He's talking about the techniques that were used. But if the people had been corrupt, right down through society, then there would have been no sufficient remedies found in Rome or elsewhere to maintain their liberty, as we shall show in the next chapter. So, in so many words, he's showing you the techniques of appeasing the great unwashed masses, as they call the public, when the corruption, as it always has, down through the ages, becomes so corrupt. When there's just too many of the psychopaths at the top to feed, and they have bottomless pits for pockets, and nothing. Eventually, everything comes to a standstill, and people are ground into poverty through taxations and so on. And the whole book, really, of Machiavelli is called his Discourses. I call it his resume, because that's what it was written for, was to show sovereign countries and princes and governments that he was up for sale with his knowledge of humanity and how to control them. Nothing new in that. That was done in all ages. As Francis Bacon did the same thing. And everything is written in such a way that there's always two ways of looking at what he's saying. One for the psychopathic's point of view, where they can utilize the knowledge, and the one that would appear to the public to be what politicians do. They give us speeches saying all the right things. Saying all the right things. The things we want to hear. Tell them what they want to hear. And that's a book which is well worth studying. It's quite fascinating. For those who want it in modern English, you can get the versions without problems at all. It's always good to go into earlier translations, because like all books, are rewritten and censored in parts as time goes on, especially when it is to do with real accurate knowledge. And especially again when the same boys are in control again and want to withdraw the knowledge from the public, so that we're dumb, stupid, and wonder what on earth is happening, and they wonder why they can't pay their rent or their mortgage and all the other fees. They call them fees now, all these extra taxes, so that you can now do something legally, whereas if you didn't pay a fee, it would be illegal. So it's amazing how money rationalizes everything and changes everything, isn't it? Now, I know this can be difficult to follow, especially when I'm trying to cram a lot in to 1 hour or so. But until we understand this technique of controlling people and the types who crave power, the abnormal types, we'll never get it fixed out, and because it keeps repeating itself. It can always be expected that the same types will get into power over time, even if you started from scratch. And this is well understood by those who do it, like Freemasonry. All the founding fathers of the US understood this. They said that we could become corrupt because, and they should know, because it was the psychopaths like themselves often who wanted power, who craved power, always for popular reason. And remember what I just read in the previous chapter about how the people often end up under a worse tyranny than the one they'd thrown off. Sometimes it takes a while to wake up to it. In page 231 is an interesting little chapter. And yes, please bear with me, it's difficult to go through for most people. It's not a nice, easygoing novel in today's dumbed-down language and minimalistic thought. But it's very important to understand these little things. This is the sort of stuff which advisors are taught. Advisors of presidents and prime ministers the world over are taught this kind of stuff. They bring in historians. That's why they always have famous historians attached to governments, like Carl Quigley. He was an advisor to governments. Or Arnold Toynbee. The people of Rome, having recovered their liberty, resumed their original rank in the state, and obtained even more influence than before by means of a number of laws that confirmed their power. It seemed reasonable, therefore, that Rome should now enjoy a period of quiet, but experience proved the contrary, for every day there were now new dissensions and disorders. And Titus Livius had most judiciously given the causes that produced these. It seemed to me proper to quote his own words where he says, "The pride of the people or of the nobles always increased as the opposite party was humbled. When the people kept within proper bounds, the young nobles began to insult them, and the tribunes could do little to prevent it, being themselves outraged. The nobles, on the other hand, although they felt that their young men were too insolent, yet seeing that the restraints imposed by law could not be observed, preferred that they should be transgressed by their own party rather than by the people. And so this party game, you see, is a part of the technique of the psychopathic personality. And thus the desire of liberty caused one party to raise themselves in proportion as they oppressed the other. And it is the course of such movements that men, in attempting to avoid fear themselves, give others a cause to fear, or for fear. And the injuries which they ward off from themselves, they inflict upon others, as though there were a necessity to oppress or to be oppressed. In this we see one of the modes in which republics are brought to ruin, and how men rise from one ambition to another. And we recognize the truth of the sentence which Sallust put into the mouth of Caesar, that all evil examples have their origin in good beginnings. That's a very important little statement there. All evil examples have their origin in good beginnings. That's what all politicians know. They say what you want to hear, where they can have evil intent behind themselves. The ambitious citizens of a republic seek in the first instance, as was said before, to make themselves sure against the attacks, not only of individuals, but even of the magistrates. Because magistrates themselves are just another group who form clubs and start to make laws. To enable them to do this, they seek to gain friends, either by apparently honest ways, or by assisting men with money, or by defending them against the powerful. And as this seems virtuous, almost everybody is readily deceived by it, and therefore no one opposes it, until the ambitious individual has, without hindrance, grown so powerful. This is very important, because this also relates to certain families, you see. Until the ambitious individual has, without hindrance, grown so powerful that private citizens fear him, and the magistrates treat him with consideration, meaning grovelling respect. And when he has risen to that point, no one at the beginning having interfered with his greatness, it becomes in the end most dangerous to attempt to cool him down, for the reasons I have given above, when speaking of the danger of trying to abate an evil that has already attained a considerable growth in a city, so that in the end the matter is reduced to this, that you must endeavour to destroy the evil at the very risk of sudden ruin, or, by allowing it to go on, submit to manifest servitude. You see, that's the bottom line. This is written by a guy who understood this because he was psychopathic himself. Unless the death of the individual or some other accident intervenes to rid the state of him. For when it is once come to that point that the citizens and the magistrates are afraid to offend him, and his adherents, that's his club, his group, and you could relate this to certain groups in the US and in Britain without any problems whatsoever. For when it has once come to that point that the citizens and the magistrates are afraid to offend him and his adherents, it will afterwards not require much effort on his part to make them render judgments and attack persons according to his will. They'll just condemn you as a terrorist or whatever they wish, you see. For this reason, republics should make it one of their aims to watch that none of their citizens should be allowed to do harm on pretense of doing good, and that no one should acquire an influence that would injure instead of promoting liberty, of which we shall speak more at length in another place. We have dynasties running the world who have coteries of advisors steeped in Machiavellianism and all the other isms written by the same types down through the ages, advisors to kings, queens, and all types of governments. They employ them to always look ahead as to avoid their problems and make it easy sailing for them. They know how to distract the public. They know how to terrify the public and just how much to terrify the public. How to divert the public's attention through wars away from those that are being tyrannical at home. And these are old sciences. Old sciences. And yet, as I say, the Tower of Babel has a faulty foundation, because none of these characters, these advisors, will touch on the foundation of money, because no one could rise above the next if they didn't have the money to pay off or to employ their personal guards, Praetorian guards, or anything else they want to call them. They need money to do it, and the public purse. Marx was quite right, and so was Lenin. They knew, because they were trained by bankers and funded by them, that the power of the purse is what controls this system. You can never rectify it, really, or alleviate the suffering and the misery caused upon people worldwide until this faulty base is eliminated. It can only repeat itself as people crave power. It's not enough to get through life for a psychopath. They want power over others. They want acclaim. They want to go down in history. They love to have buildings named after them and streets named after them and statues put up. A megalomania is what they suffer from. And there are different degrees of it. The megalomania can take the form of acquiring degrees or honorary degrees or titles and honorary awards and all that kind of stuff. That's all to appeal to the ego. Other ones get more ambitious and they want to go through wars at the head of army. Well, they never go to the head of the army, except that has been rewritten. They'll sit in the rear, but they want to be seen as some sort of victor, because their nature is a natural thing which children have, and some adults manage to retain it. It's part of an intuitive self-defense mechanism, a preservation mechanism, where often if you neglect something at your peril, an image will flash in your mind, and a child often who's half hypnotized half the time will be unable to remember afterwards if it was real or not, or imagined, but something will push itself to the fore because the subconscious is trying to tell them something. That's where symbols have their prime origin, from the unconscious to the subconscious to the conscious mind. And a long time ago, I thought about what they meant by a Satan character, an embodiment or personification, really, of all evil. Poneros, as the Greeks called it. And when you look at gods or devils, it's no coincidence they have human attributes, because they take the extremes from one to the other of human attributes and project it onto their deities. Devil characters, Satan characters, have all the cunning, always all the cunning on their side, you'll notice. The trickster, that which can deceive and play a chess game with you as the pawn without you being aware that you're even on the board. That's the cunningness we're talking about, is the cunningness of the psychopath, who's very quick and agile with their mind. It's a gift they have, if you want to call it a gift. They don't have to work at it. It's there. This can be reinforced through character training by their own elite families, so that they don't give the game away. They know how to play the game and what the public expect to see and hear. Or they can still play the game and be very quick. On the bottom end of the same spectrum, the same types, you'll find the con man in the street, who has his various kinds of cons going on, his stings, you know. And the trick with a good con man is to pull people in by giving, you give a format initially for a person to perceive. You know how they're going to perceive it. And then you help, but you don't lead, but you help to lead them along the process that a normal human being will go through as he tries to figure something out, until at the end the person is stuck and says, my God, I've been swindled. When it suddenly hits them, they've lost everything and they can't figure out how on earth they managed it, because they were played all the way through by a psychopathic con man or woman. And it's no different at the top, except they're born into powerful families of the same type, who run the world through money and through taking money, which just represents your labor, as Marx and Lenin both said. Or as Charles Galton Darwin said, in the next million years, we are forming a more... There's always been slavery, he said. We are simply forming and creating a new and more efficient form of slavery. Well, you see, it's here. It's here. It's called democracy. All that's on the front of it looks good. It would have appealed to Machiavelli as a very good pretense, a facade for the public. It says all the right things, sounds good, until you look at what runs it. And the old adage comes in, well, who benefits? And it should also say, who suffers? And to beware of those who promise you all the good things and bring you to a worse ruin than you had before. Another way to say it is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But it can only be paved with good intentions if the suckers are willing to walk along it. We have to be aware of the evil that hasn't just appeared in our midst. It's been here for an awful long time. And I've no doubt it was psychopaths who first invented money, and even before money, the weighing of certain things like gold or silver. How else could they take over an entire system and run people cleverly, so cleverly, as slaves, until you have a system of what they call progress, where guys like Charles Galton Darwin says that it's always been a slavery system, and that brought us to this, what he claimed was a more sophisticated form, where we were trained from birth that we're free. There isn't a government in the world today that doesn't have its annual scandal of millions or even billions of whatever currency they use, it's all a con anyway, going missing. And they have their inquiries, and we go back to sleep and no one's punished, and it's accepted. The big honey pot where the bears get into the taxpayers' money. The problem is today, with the advisors and the sciences and the communication between themselves, we have a world elite, the big club, who understand all of the things I've been talking about, who've known for a long time that they would take us to this stage of basic exploitation, and they knew they would get to a crunch because, as I say, they hire professors and the best historians who will tell them, well, you know, if you go on like this, you can't keep it, you're just going to collapse. So they're prepared for it, and they hope this time to put the cap on it all and save themselves any more problem about appeasing all of the little people. As Machiavelli says, all they want, you know, the rest, you know, those little people, the rest, all they want is peace and security, as though that was a secondary thought. Or an afterthought. So they're well aware of where they've taken us all. And they planned long before we were born to, one way or another, either lobotomize us, drug us, or, as I say, implant something in our old brain box to save them the problems of pretense, the acting that goes on all the time, the propaganda, and all the distractions they must allow us to have, the sports and all this stuff that we're supposed to be fascinated about. Yawn. And so they don't plan in falling this time. Yet down through history, they've always been kicked out one way or another when it got too bad. But they never stop. They start with their little secret societies because they recognize each other. They know they must cooperate with each other. They know they still have the same money system, and that's the key. That cannot possibly exist and have a just society at the same time. And they work away quietly until they regain power again. And as Machiavelli said there about certain ones who become rich and powerful until magistrates, your whole legal system, is terrified of them. The public are terrified of them. And it always leads to the same ruin for the people. People have to start pointing out and pointing to the corruption. When you expose psychopaths, they have nothing left to fall back on. When you say the king has no clothes, you burst the bubble of illusion and respectability and propaganda. Yet this has to be done because the big boys mean business. They've published what they want to do with the public. We're watching a world police state being formed. It's not being, it is formed, it's here. We're going into this incredible Orwellian system, which again is already here. All data on everything that you do has been collected. As they prattle on about Muslims in Islam. So that wraps it up pretty well. I've had about 3 trains go by. If it sounds disjointed, it's because I have to pause everything as these trains from China come through with all their masses of plastic goodies and things for the stores to be on sale for the weekend probably across the country. Most people floated through that whole era of their industry going to China and thought nothing of it. It just happened by chance. Didn't realize of all the planning it took 40 years of negotiations and intergovernmental and inter-business organizations to all formulate that. And trained too in the West. All the engineers from China were trained in the Western universities. Nothing happens by chance. We just float through it, and the media doesn't make a big deal out of it, so people don't think about it. We worry about what we're told to worry about and are diverted into sports and entertainment. And the latest silicone babe. And that's supposed to be the topics that are presented and should be talked about by the little people down below. So I advise people who are serious to read the works of authors such as Machiavelli. You'll be able to relate much of what you're seeing today to what he puts in his book, because it's the same repetitive techniques over and over that you're witnessing today, only in a much grander, larger, coordinated worldwide scale. And then you'll be less frightened of things which you understand. We're always afraid of that which we don't understand. When you understand things, the fear tends to dissipate. And we should never be afraid or be allowed to be. You cannot live in fear. That's not living at all. So there's a hurried blurb between lots of phone calls. And I hope you get something from it. Have a good weekend. From my dog Hamish and myself, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.